Good afternoon, folks. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. And this is where, as per usual, you've got to tell me whether you can or not, because I just end up getting paranoid for the first few minutes. So you've got to let me know whether you're getting me. This is my Friday, because lo and behold, I won't be doing a chewing it over in the midst of Therapy Live, right? That would be absolutely mental. It's already a bit crazy that we're doing a 100-session, 10-stream conference tomorrow, and that still scares the hell out of me. But I certainly won't be live streaming in the middle of it. So you've got to forgive me that. So this is my Friday, and what a show we've got for you. As you'll have seen in the titles, we've got a lovely blog response that was written by a set of a pair of sports rehabilitators to the blog we had on Chewing It Over from Uzo a couple of weeks ago. And so it's just this idea of what professions are well placed to deliver quality exercise rehab and where the competence is, training provisions, that sort of stuff. It's just a really interesting conversation. You guys loved it with Uzo, and this just adds so much to that conversation and really helps us towards being better, more credible MSK industry to serve patients in the best way, and who is best placed to do so. Workforce planning, competency-based recruitment, all my favorite topics and subjects. This just feeds perfectly into it, which is great. So I'm fortunate to have the authors of that piece, Chris Peil and Carolan and Coburn from BASRaT, which is the British Association of Sports Rehabilitators and Athletic Trainers, I think, and trainers. I always get that wrong. Sorry about that, Ollie. You might disappear now from my lobby, so hopefully he's still there. Thank you, those of you that are tuning in. It sounds like I'm getting through loud and clear, which is decent. And the best telltale of that means if it's working live, then Alistair Beverley will be promoting #Team Public Health and his sessions tomorrow. So yeah, thank you very much, Alistair, and do join us at Therapy Live if you haven't already got your ticket, if you're one of the 3 people in the country, of course, that haven't yet, because we've got busy, which is lovely. Right, so without further ado, let me click a few buttons and see if I can bring today's guests on. Let's get them going. Can you hear me, fellas?
Yeah, got you.
Good.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Fantastic. Yeah, right. So what I want to do first is just quick intros from each of you, as well as then whoever's best placed to answer the question of why did you feel compelled to write a response to this piece? And we've just had a lovely chat off air about that. So shall we start with you first, Chris, if we could just introduce yourself, Chris, then Mike, then Ollie, because Ollie's a bit of a veteran of Chewing It Over, so we don't need to hear much from him.
So my name's Chris Peil. I work underneath Mike at University of Salford as a teaching and learning fellow. And I'm actually from an exercise background. I was involved as a personal trainer before I was a clinician, and retrained later on and joined BASRaT following that retraining. So I have a master's in sports medicine, and I'm dual accredited, I suppose, if you like, with NSCA, CSCS.
Brilliant. And Mike?
Hi guys, so I work on the sports rehab team at Salford, looking after all the the exercise and conditioning modules, as well as teaching on some of the third year stuff as well, supervising dissertations, etc. When I'm not doing that, I'm actually a little bit of a skill blended performance coach, looking after track and field athletes, and then working for basketball and England and Great Britain basketball as well. So my background is half sports rehab, half strength and conditioning. But again, I've thrown in things like nutrition and athletics coaching in there as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And Ollie?
Yeah, most of you already know me, guys. Sports rehab clinician by background, and now policy bod for BASRaT.
Fantastic. So each of you got skin in this game for different reasons for the blog, but I think, am I right that Mike, it's you I need to come to speak to that next point? Is what was it about Uzo's blog that moved you to write a response as you have?
I think it was the question posed that really resonated with me, because having started out as an athletics coach as a kid, and then came to the university to study sports rehab, and I was in a lot of therapy roles in early on in my career, and I didn't really get into the exercise stuff until later, and it wasn't until I started doing little bits in track and field with strength and conditioning that I started to find that actually much of that stuff was where I wanted to go, but also the outcomes I was getting were really good. I then spent around 4 years working in the Ministry of Defence as an exercise rehab instructor, working alongside an RMO, so regimental medical officer, as well as 2 physios, nurses, mental health nurses, etc. And I looked after all the exercise. So when this blog came out and the question was posed with regards to, you know, say a gap in someone's skill set, and would strength and conditioning be appropriate for, say, a physio to do, I kind of approached the team and said, why don't we propose it from a clinical kind of strength and conditioning perspective, that there may be another route. So it's not just about, from my point of view, practitioners, as in, you know, employ a sports rehabilitator instead of a physio, or maybe, you know, instead have a bit of a blended team where you've got a physio and an SR, or if you can't afford that, train a physio in SR as well. So you've got that kind of that dual accreditation, or vice versa. If you're a strength and conditioning coach and you're reading this article, but you want a little bit more of a clinical skill set, you could do physio or you could do SR. And it's just to open that conversation. And that was kind of the premise around it.
Now, I want to get stuck into the education piece, which has ended up being quite a really interesting point, because it's like the heart of the blog, and then there's the table, and I know you've had some response and some controversy around that. So I'll be coming to you in a second, Chris. But I think, Ollie, we've spoken before on this show and elsewhere about the fact that one of the reasons why it ends up being a bit of a jump, and so people then say S&C, and then if you want to go clinical physio, and it seems like a big jump, is in part because of accessibility of roles, which I know you work on an awful lot and make the case for the opening up. You seem to be supportive of MSKR's work at the moment on competency-based recruitment and the language of MSK therapists and rehab centre practice. What do you think that is the reason why this conversation gets a bit stunted, where people make that jump to physio? Or is it purely just an awareness thing? And once people know of you guys, then actually they're really open to it. What's the story?
Yeah, I think it's the latter point, Jack. In the wider context, you've got to remember that we're still a relatively new profession. We're only 21 years old, 22 years old. And there's still plenty of people that haven't heard about us. Or even those that have necessarily aren't fully informed on our background and our educational background, standards, etc. And that's our job, to improve that awareness of what we do as a role. And again, that's one of the reasons that we felt we needed to come back with the blog, is that's an exercise in raising awareness about what we do, or particularly what people can do at a graduate level.
No,
but as you say, definitely an advocate of the competency-based recruitment and MSKR principles for sure. And that this discussion just sits alongside it, really. We're trying to highlight what the key strengths and competencies of a GSR are.
Sure. And so, Chris, if I can ask you, you're obviously working in education now, especially from that fitness and personal training background and things. As the skill set that Uzo was talking about and admitting to gaps in himself and his peers in physiotherapy, was them reading the original piece for you an exercise in recognizing yourself and the things you teach in the gaps that he was mentioning?
From my personal perspective, things happen for me fairly organically. So I was working as a personal trainer, had a successful business, really, but I was getting a lot of people coming to me asking for me to help them because they've been injured and they've been referred. So organically, I ended up almost going down a rehab route, where people were saying, I've had loads of treatment, I've been to see everybody under the sun who gives me treatment, and my friend says they came to you to exercise and it's made them feel much better, they're getting great results, I should try it. And it left me in an awkward position where I didn't feel that was particularly ideal from like an ethical perspective, and I didn't like that. Essentially, if somebody comes through the door, we go through the proper process in terms of a referral process, so that I'm not acting outside of my insurance and such like. You still end up in a situation where nobody gives you any real guidance. So you get basically yes or no. Yes, they can exercise with you with the qualifications you have, or no, they can't. And if it's yes, they can, to a degree, you're then winging it from an exercise or performance background. So basically, just by being sensible, I developed this reputation. And then what do you do if you do something with somebody? They come through the door next week and go, after my last session, my knee actually swelled up a little bit. You go, you can't do anything. And that's where we're talking about the performance side of it, and S&C coaches offering rehab. That's where they're at. And it's not that they're not very good at working on things that will actually improve somebody's physical capacity, so that the sort of etiological factors are addressed. It's that if they have anything like that, they can't do any assessment and they can't do any diagnosis. So I identified I needed to address that and went and did that. And I would obviously encourage other people from a performance end of things to do the same. But that also kind of links up with, I was getting a lot of people coming to me because actually they'd got to a point where sort of therapeutic interventions had helped them, but they'd identified themselves, particularly active populations, they weren't moving forward anymore. And they were in a bit of a cycle where they get to a certain point and then they try to go back to where they were before, training wise or performance wise, and they'd have the same thing crop up again or something similar crop up again. Right. And how do they actually get past that? And what I kind of saw from going through the upskilling process was that really in the private sector, rehab doesn't really exist. And in fairness, to a great extent, I don't think in the NHS side of things, it does to the extent people think it does or think they should get.
Right.
So people are being either held at a point of being given therapeutic interventions or discharged at a point that, well, we've still got a big gap, a big gap before they're at the point they need to be to do what they want to do. And to me, that's what we do. We bridge that gap. And the article was all about that, saying, okay, this is actually what this whole program is aimed at. And it was identified by the people who founded the program that their skill set that they had at the time as physios didn't get them all the way up to handing them back over to the sport coaches or the performance staff. Team. There was this gap.
Did it ever, when you read Uzo's blog, Chris, did it surprise you at all, or are you just au fait with physio's position and scope, etc.? Was there anything about it that was any news to you?
To be fair, what surprised me most, and as we said in the blog, I applaud it, is that he was so open and honest about, do you know what, I'm not going to hide from this. I'm aware that there is a deficit there. And I think we talked about potentially a bit of a negative reaction from some people, particularly focused around the table and oversimplifying tick boxing, this, that, and the other. That I feel like is often people looking at it and taking the attitude that it's like the Sarah cycle, isn't it? The shock, the anger, the realization thing. That their initial thing is just shock. Someone's questioned that I'm going to be able to do something. And then instead of going, I wonder if I could do it better. I wonder if it would be better for my athletes, better for my clients, if I did do some upskilling. I wonder. They're too busy. They've already gone down the rabbit hole. They're already trying to criticize.
They do feel threatened, and also they don't read the detail in order to understand the nuance that's there in both pieces. And so I want to just, unfortunately, to our live audience, we had a glitch like this yesterday with Joe Turner. The chat is glitching a little bit, so if you've posted comments, you need to try, if you don't mind, just reposting them. Then that would be great. I want to ask you as an audience, if you can, to participate by answering this question. The same I just posed to Chris. Did the blog of Uzo's and then the response, did anything surprise you? Are you aware? Do you feel competent in understanding the differences in scope as well as learning and education that each of the different professions have? And that's, obviously some of you might not have read it yet. I've posted the link in the chat, but I definitely would be interested as to whether or not you feel you're in touch with contemporary syllabus and delivery, as well as the scope of practice of the professions then as graduates. So please do get in touch to let us know what your thoughts in that direction. But I know there is a bit of a tech bug that means that unfortunately it does seem to be rejecting some of your comments. But Mike, I want to ask then, tell us about that controversy that might have been caused, or some of the reactions to the blog response.
Well, I think when we look at the fact that we are all kind of mandated to be evidence-based practitioners, and with that in mind, if there is a concept that's being put out there, the best thing to do is read around that concept and then offer an opinion or offer an insight. What many people did, because the table atypically came up with the title, or was shared and was easy to snapshot, people would look at the table, then look at the fact that our kind of primary roles, mine, Chris's and Evie's, and Steve Aspinall's, is teaching at the University of Salford on a sports rehab degree. They jumped to a conclusion that we basically sat there and slated another profession. And we're kind of like
on context then for those that haven't seen it. This is a table of 3 columns in which it then details a set of what would you call them?
Well, the first one is undergraduate training with regards to kind of the curriculums, and it's atypical curriculums because there's something like 110 courses across the UK in physiotherapy, so there are going to be some discrepancies. So with that in mind, a lot of people have come on and said, I feel disgruntled and I'm not happy. And And then when I've tried to engage with them on social media, they've said, actually, I've not read the blog. I've just looked at the table.
Right.
So it's out of context. And the easiest way to describe that is if you take, say, one of the YLM sports science infographics, and you just use the information from the infographic and don't read the study, you might miss something that's inferred within the study that isn't covered in the infographic. Yeah. And that's what was happening. People were jumping to conclusions and challenging us on why there was a ticks in one box and not in the other. And the idea was to show the comparative differences and depth and breadth, because physiotherapy covers many, many aspects of clinical care. Okay, but we're specifically replying to Uzo's post about exercise rehabilitation, which is a very, very specific area. Yeah. So the point is that if there's a discrepancy, this is the discrepancy, because even between strength and conditioning and clinical practices such as physio and sports rehab, there are also some discrepancies. And, that kind of leads back into Chris's point earlier. So people were quite reactionary without understanding the context, even to the point where, and we talked about this offline with regards to either having an MDT, and I don't like the word MDT because MDT means you send them to someone else, you work in the same team, but you don't interwork. So I prefer the term interdisciplinary, where you actually work alongside each other, and there is a skill blend as well. And there's really good examples of this, either in the Ministry of Defence with physio, RMO, ERI, PT or physical trainer, all working in unison. There are really good examples in professional sports, in the Premier League, for instance, where there's a doctor I know who hires other doctors if they're competent in the gym, doing massage and kind of having a bit of a skill blend, even though their primary role is a doctor. So with that in mind, I try to engage people with that, to say, we're not saying physiotherapy is rubbish. We're not doing that at all, because I would be disrespecting some of the people that came before me, like Julian, who we mentioned in the article, and a couple of my mentors that taught me on a rehab degree. And there are several physios that have taught on rehab degrees as well, so the article would be disrespectful if we were saying they weren't capable. The point is that when someone comes out of university and they maybe they're going down the rabbit hole of exercise rehab, and it's like, say, a year or two in, they might be identifying that actually their skill set in that area needs to develop, and everybody has to do CPD. So what we're talking about is an opportunity to upskill.
Of course.
And that's literally it.
I think a lot of
it was
people
a physio who raised the question.
Oh, sorry.
So physio saying,
go on,
a physio almost saying, it's a real shame this doesn't exist, because I think we need to be better in terms of exercise-based rehab. So as a result, I'm off doing this, but actually it doesn't really fit. I wish this thing existed that fits. And all we're saying is,
hi,
it does. Hi, have a look at this if you're interested. And for those people who are open-minded and positive and looking to self-improve, that's fantastic. And that's what we're looking at, really.
Contextually, as someone that I've made a living out of arguing on the internet about this stuff, so I'm certainly not opposed to the fact that happens and people jump to conclusions, and I don't mind it because we get to do shows like this about it. However, it was a bit amusing though that people were it was as if the context that they were trying to respond to was as if you'd done that from a standing start, right? And therefore there needs to be far more nuance on this, please. And it's like, well, no, you clearly need to refer to the original post of which this is a response to, and a really appropriately polite one. I think that if anything, I was reading it and I was delighted, of course, to see it with the tone and tenor that it had, rather than it being, it would have been petty, I think, to have made it's a telling omission that you've not mentioned us. It didn't come at it from that angle. Instead, it was more, we agree for these reasons, and let's move the conversation along, which I think was a lovely tone. Ollie, I just want to bring you in because Kelly Clinton's made a really lovely point here on the chat. Thanks, Kelly, for persisting trying to get that through, about protectionism over title and scope of practice, and the honest conversation being lacking. Do you agree with that as being a force in this that's at play?
Potentially, I think for some people.
You're being too diplomatic there, though, aren't you?
Yeah,
for some people, for a lot.
So
of people,
my
I'm
stance
not saying the majority, but it's not a few,
think,
is it?
We've discussed protectionism quite a bit, haven't we? And I know my stance and BASRaT's stance on protectionism is and I know physiotherapy colleagues share this. It came up yesterday with the stuff from the RCN,
sure,
and AHPs going into nursing roles. There's no need to be protectionist because there's plenty of work to go around. There's a massive workforce shortage. There's plenty of patients to be seen, and the most competent people to see those patients are the ones that should see those patients. Having said that, I also fully believe there's absolutely no problem whatsoever of being proud of your background and being proud of your profession, which is something that physiotherapists are very good at, and have historically been very good at and are always very vocal about. I don't think that anybody else should be chastised for doing the same, whether they're an osteo, a chiro, a sports therapist, or a graduate sports rehabber. So I think sometimes being proud of your profession and being protectionist can become kind of crossed wires a little bit.
Well, I can't help but, especially because this show, we do dabble with this now and again, and don't worry, gents, I'm not going to drag you there, but it's like, where does patriotism start and nationalism? Where does patriotism finish and nationalism start, right? So we know that's a challenge.
Standards.
Sure,
there's a need to protect standards, and this is it. I'm incredibly proud of being a sports rehabber because I spent a lot of money and a lot of effort when I could have stuck my head in the sand and said, no, I don't need to do any of that. I'm good enough as I am. Look how busy I am. Look how much money I'm making. But it wasn't the right thing to do. So it isn't what I did. But there are certainly people from, personal training is a perfect example. Without getting into it too much, some of the soft tissue therapy stuff, similar situation, where there's such a range of standards and they haven't protected standards within their own industry, that the better ones are saying, no, we want to be seen on the same level as all of these other professions. And it can't happen. And it can't happen because, unfortunately, you can't unring that bell. So those professions, and I think physio are right for doing this, who have always had high entry standards, should be protected of that. Absolutely. But then I think BASRaT's in the same situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ollie, but there's an extremely high standard for undergraduate entry across the board for BASRaT accredited programs. So we haven't got any low standards.
And entry to the register.
So we don't have any low standards.
As you know, about to get more difficult with the certification exam.
So, physiotherapy doesn't need to be threatened by BASRaT and GSRs, that is going to drag down standards and that is going to dilute standards. And as Ollie says, there's loads of work to be done. I think that's an important distinction to make, and that's what we should all be trying to do, is to drive up standards and drive up the athlete experience, the patient experience, the client experience, whichever terminology you want to use.
Chris is spot on there, actually, and the protectionism kind of argument, debate, whatever you want to call it, almost kind of forgets that we're not in this for ourselves, or we shouldn't be in this for ourselves. If you're in any of these professions for yourself, then you're in the wrong profession. We're in it for patients. So actually, the protectionism thing can only go so far. When you go back to competencies and what's best for the patient, that's why standards are important, because we are working with patients and we're having an impact on their lives. But who's treating them, shouldn't really matter.
Just because it's the most polite thing that's ever happened on this show, I'm going to bring Chris in because he just put his hand up.
I just want to say, I hate the term patient. I think it keeps people feeling like they're broken and it stops us actually rehabbing them. So mine aren't patients, mine are athletes. No matter who you are, you're an athlete.
Yeah, I quite like that. I think that, though, to some extent, I think that's what's interesting from a physio, being my background. You do use the language of patient, and I know that does sometimes hold them back in your context, but then fundamentally, client and service user and stuff like that just gets cringe to me. So I will have to agree to disagree on some of it. Matt Scarsbrook's made a point here about soft tissue therapy having at least 12 professional associations, 2 voluntary registers, and what the hell are standards? Ollie, you guys seem to have had that from both sides. Then you've witnessed variation both clinically and in educational delivery within, say, physiotherapy, which is technically a highly regulated profession of sort of legacy credibility and some social cut through and a size and scale that's relevant there and a great legacy too as well. I'm not saying that dismissively. I just mean in an MSK context, I'm on record having a few grabs in that direction, right? But then on the other side of it, with regards to the soft tissue therapies and non-graduate sports therapy side, where it gets messy because it kind of is drawn so thin. You seem to be trying to correct for both of those things simultaneously by then setting an appropriately high bar, but not arbitrarily. Is that kind of, am I understanding that right as BASRaT's position?
Yeah, we set a bar. We're clear on our standards. We're clear on what it means to be on our register. And then we also are an accredited register. So there's independent oversight that the standards that we say we're upholding, we are actually upholding.
Right. And Mike, as an educationalist, just could you speak to how you adhere to that when then bringing people through, and how do you aspire people to care about that quality so that they don't feel like they're just being henpecked on things that they would argue might be arbitrary sometimes?
Well, I mean, I'm an admissions tutor for the degree at Salford as well. So I do a lot of kind of front-facing work with applicants, and I see a lot of applicants that are, that want to do this, and the main thing I look for at the moment is passion and interest. And we've even taken on some personal trainers through the APEL process that have done amazingly well in first year, and really and truly, like, the grades and prerequisites are a part of that process, but we also want to know what the career goal is, and it's one of the key questions I ask in interviews is, well, what's your end goal? Where do you see yourself in 10 to 15 years? And how are we going to help you get there as well? So, and with regards to kind of curriculum, we, with Alan Monroe and other guys at Salford and throughout BASRaT as well, what we're trying to do is constantly improve those standards as well, based on current evidence, but also what's happening within the workforce and the demand from, like you say, the users at the end stage as well. So COVID's one big example of that, and Ollie and Steve and the guys at BASRaT have obviously done a great deal of work around can we help on that front. And that's the thing. I think one thing people, again, missed the boat on was, we're here to help, whether it is through an educational standpoint to help people upskill, or whether it is to add to the workforce. And, one comment was made something along the lines of, well, we're better at diagnosis. It isn't about necessarily diagnosis. And I'm not saying that's not important. What we're talking about is post-diagnosis.
That wasn't the vlog either, right? That's not what you were responding to. So it's petty.
Yeah, I've said so many times, did you read the blog? Did you read the article? And many people actually said, no, I just looked at the table. Well, read the article, then let's have a chat, because then you'll understand that we're not here to say you are any better than anybody else. But what's really interesting is that about 80 years ago, there used to be gymnastic remedial instructors. Physiotherapy amalgamated them into their profession because they saw the benefit of that. So the same way here, physiotherapists saw that they needed a different profession or a different skill set. They founded sports rehab. So there's always a progression and a kind of a legacy to this. Yeah, so we're not here to take jobs. Yeah. And we're not here to take jobs. We're here to help. That's the bottom line.
BASRaT are fundamentally an incredibly positive and inclusive organisation if you meet standards. I thought I would be treated strangely and like a ginger stepchild because of an alternative background, and I couldn't say that it couldn't have been any more different to that. Everyone's really interested in what your background is and what you can offer because of that different experience and different entry into the profession. My background in terms of private practice, I don't know many other people who could say they've worked with 4 different deadlift world record holders. So I work with people who are like big, strong meatheads. Right. Yet through BASRaT, at the start of the COVID crisis, I was working in a residential nursing home, providing NHS support, because that's what we did. We provided support. And, it's the same exercise-based rehab skills that you use to make somebody stronger, whether it's falls prevention or whether you're working with the strongest people on the planet. And I think that's what Mike's saying. We can add to the workforce, and obviously Ollie's saying, we can add to the workforce, we can add to it with people who are meeting very high standards, comparable standards, and more to the point, would welcome other people to come and be dual registered if they have the appropriate skill set, and would invite people to sort of come together and go, yeah, let's get on board and go, yeah, this is a gold standard for the exercise rehab speciality.
Because I think cognitive diversity.
Sorry, say again, Mike. Cognitive diversity, is that what you said?
Yeah, it's cognitive. It's the goal is cognitive diversity in discourse, and addressing skill set deficits rather than just have a one size fits all. If you've got a hammer in your toolbox and that's it, and that's the danger. Anybody can go down that rabbit hole. So it's offering a range of skill sets, but a high level of skill sets as well.
So I'm conscious of time, and it's amazing. I mean, we could continue on this in this direction. So it just gives a snapshot. But thank you for writing it. Thank you for being answerable and accountable to it, both on social media and here. The conversation goes on, of course, and that was one of the things that was beautiful about the piece. Is it was clearly part of a wider conversation, inviting further dialogue rather than a response, rebuttal, an opposing debate position. But also, it's declared, and I'm known to be both a BASRaT fan and a sports rehab fan. Just to leave it with this and potentially invite further conversation both on and off air about this, is that for someone that, granted, I've got a few bits on at the moment, but I'm someone that would be perfectly primed, and many of my team being primed to become one of those dual registered therapists that then go into and would benefit greatly, knowing the syllabus as I do, more with my policy hat on. However, because of the way in which that doesn't necessarily unlock overt doors, it does intellectually, it does academically, of course, but because of the workforce and policy piece and the fact that people then think, sod it, I'll scratch around doing kind of unaccredited CPD, I will instill, just bolster my skill set and protect some of my time and stuff, and therefore they don't necessarily go into that formal training as much. I think that that's one of the things I want to try and work out and understand better myself, is to how we can encourage that and see and shine a light on some of those examples you've said of it done really well. I accept that they're going to be out there, and maybe we can bring them to the fore. So I'm sorry we've run out of time. I'm just leaving that out there for maybe to try and bait you guys back. Really appreciate what you've done, 100%. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Cheers, Jack. Good luck for Therapy Live, mate. I hope it goes well.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us.
Mate.
Look forward to involving you all, no doubt, in the future. Now,
thanks for having us on.
All right. Take care. Cheers, guys.
Bye.